Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest waves of change. What happens when a child's simple need for nutrition becomes the catalyst for a life-altering encounter? In a world where wealth and poverty exist side by side, where does compassion truly live? This is the story of how one spoonful of milk, one moment of desperation, and one unexpected stranger transformed not just one life, but an entire community. What you're about to read will challenge everything you think you know about judgment, generosity, and the power of seeing beyond appearances. It's a story that proves miracles don't always come wrapped in golden paper. Sometimes they arrive in the most ordinary moments when we least expect them. Are you ready to discover how a single act of humanity can ripple through time and change everything? The morning sun painted golden streaks across the cracked pavement as 8-year-old Maya clutched her grandmother's weathered hand. Her stomach had been growling since the night before, a familiar companion that seemed to follow her everywhere these days. The small corner store ahead looked like a palace to her hungry eyes, its windows gleaming with promises of food and comfort. Maya's grandmother, Elena, counted the few coins in her palm for the third time that morning. Her arthritic fingers trembled slightly as she separated the money, trying to make each penny stretch further than physics would allow. They had exactly enough for a loaf of bread and perhaps a small carton of milk. It would have to last them until Elena's next cleaning job at the end of the week. The bell above the store door chimed as they entered, and Maya's eyes immediately went to the dairy section. She had been dreaming about milk for days, remembering how it tasted when her mother was still alive, how it filled the empty spaces in her belly and made everything feel normal again. Elena noticed her granddaughter's longing gaze and felt her heart crack a little more. At 72, she was doing her best to raise Maya alone, but some days felt like climbing a mountain with bare hands. Behind the counters stood Mr. Peterson, a man whose face had been carved by years of dealing with customers from all walks of life. His store served the poorer side of town, and he had seen more than his share of struggle. He watched as Elena carefully selected the cheapest bread and the smallest carton of milk, calculating each purchase with the precision of someone who knew what hunger felt like. Maya wandered the aisles while her grandmother made their modest purchases, her imagination transforming the simple store into a wonderland of possibilities. She pretended she could fill a cart with anything she wanted, like the family she sometimes saw on television. In her mind, she loaded imaginary groceries, fresh fruit that didn't have bruises, meat that wasn't on sale because it was about to expire, and yes, a big gallon of milk just for her. The reality check came when Elena called her to the counter. Maya watched as her grandmother handed over their precious coins, receiving the small bag that contained their sustenance for the next few days. It was then that Maya noticed something that made her heart race with excitement. Mr. Peterson had left a small plastic spoon on the counter next to an open container of free samples. The samples were meant for coffee creamer, but to Maya, it looked like the most wonderful opportunity in the world. Her 8-year-old logic told her that if she could just have one tiny taste of fresh milk, it might make the hunger go away, at least for a moment. Without thinking about consequences, she reached for the spoon and dipped it into their newly purchased milk carton. The milk was cool and creamy, exactly as she remembered from better times. For just a second, Maya closed her eyes and let herself imagine that food wasn't a daily worry, that she could have milk whenever she wanted it. But her moment of innocent joy was shattered by a sharp voice that cut through her reverie like a knife. Mr. Peterson had noticed what she was doing, and his face flushed red with anger. In his mind, he saw not a hungry child seeking comfort, but a potential thief who might encourage others to take advantage of his generosity. He had been running the store for 15 years, and he had learned to protect his slim profit margins with fierce determination. The confrontation that followed would be burned into Maya's memory forever. Mr. Peterson's voice boomed across the small store as he accused her of stealing, his words falling on her like physical blows. Maya tried to explain that it was their milk, that she had just wanted to taste it, but her small voice was lost in the storm of adult anger and misunderstanding. Other customers in the store began to stare, some with sympathy, others with judgment. Maya felt their eyes on her like spotlights, illuminating her shame and poverty for everyone to see. Her grandmother tried to intervene, explaining their situation in broken English mixed with Spanish, but Mr. Peterson was beyond reasoning. He had made his decision, and nothing would change his mind. The ejection from the store was swift and humiliating. Mr. Peterson took back their purchases, refunded their money, and pointed toward the door with a finality that left no room for argument. Maya found herself standing on the sidewalk, tears streaming down her face, her grandmother's comforting arms wrapped around her shaking shoulders. The hunger that had driven her to that innocent taste now felt like a living thing clawing at her insides. Elena's heart broke watching her granddaughter's confusion and pain. This was not the world she wanted Maya to learn about, not yet. At 8 years old, Maya should have been worried about homework and playground games, not where their next meal would come from. But life had dealt them a hand that required both of them to grow up faster than nature intended. As they stood outside the store, Maya couldn't understand why wanting milk was wrong. In her young mind, she struggled to comprehend a world where a spoonful of something they had paid for could cause such anger. She looked up at her grandmother with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young, and Elena saw her own failures reflected back at her. The other customers who witnessed the scene began to file out of the store, some avoiding eye contact, others offering sympathetic glances that felt more like pity than comfort. Maya learned a hard lesson that morning about how the world sees people like her, about how poverty can make you invisible until you do something that reminds others of your existence. A group of teenagers across the street began to point and whisper, adding another layer of humiliation to an already devastating morning. Maya pressed her face against her grandmother's worn coat, wishing she could disappear entirely. The smell of cooking food from nearby restaurants seemed to mock their empty stomachs, and the sounds of normal life continued around them as if nothing had happened. Elena eventually found her voice, whispering soft reassurances in Maya's ear, while her own tears threatened to fall. She promised they would find another store, that everything would be okay, but the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. They both knew that other stores might treat them the same way, that their appearance and obvious poverty marked them as unwelcome in many places. As they began to walk away from the store, Maya looked back over her shoulder one last time. She saw Mr. Peterson through the window, already serving the next customer, as if nothing had happened. In that moment, she realized that their humiliation was just a minor inconvenience to him, a small disruption in his day that he had already forgotten. The morning that had started with hope and the simple desire for nutrition had transformed into a lesson about dignity, respect, and the way society treats those who have less. Maya didn't know it yet that this moment would stay with her forever, shaping how she saw the world and her place in it. What neither Maya nor her grandmother could have imagined as they walked down that sidewalk, their heads hung low and their hearts heavy, was that someone had been watching the entire scene unfold. Someone whose presence would soon change everything they thought they knew about kindness, justice, and the possibility of hope in a world that had shown them so little mercy. The stage was set for an encounter that would prove that sometimes, when things seem darkest, the universe has a way of sending exactly what you need, exactly when you need it most. But first, Maya and Elena had to make it through the rest of this difficult day, carrying with them the weight of rejection and the growing fear that this was simply how their world worked. Across the street from the corner store, a man in an expensive but understated suit sat in his luxury sedan, speaking quietly into his phone. To any casual observer, James Morrison looked like any other successful businessman conducting his daily affairs. His car, while clearly expensive, wasn't flashy, and his clothes spoke of quality rather than showing off wealth. This was intentional. James had learned long ago that true power often worked better when it remained hidden. What most people didn't know about James Morrison was that he was worth over $200 million. His technology company had revolutionized data storage systems, and his investments had multiplied his wealth beyond what most people could imagine. But success hadn't made him forget his own childhood, growing up in poverty with a single mother who worked 3 jobs just to keep them housed and fed. James had been parked outside the store for only a few minutes, taking a call from his assistant about a board meeting, when the scene inside caught his attention. Through the large windows, he could see everything unfolding with perfect clarity. He watched as the little girl, no older than his own daughter, had been at that age, reached for what appeared to be a simple taste of milk. At first, James thought he was witnessing a normal family moment, perhaps a grandmother letting her granddaughter sample their purchase before heading home. But as the situation escalated, James felt his blood pressure rising, and his jaw tightening with anger that surprised him with its intensity. He ended his phone call abruptly, ignoring his assistant's confusion, and focused entirely on the drama playing out before him. Through the window, he could see the store owner's face turning red, his finger pointing accusingly at the small child. James watched as the little girl's expression changed from innocent joy to confusion, then to fear, and finally to heartbreak. The businessman had seen enough corporate backstabbing and ruthless negotiations to know cruelty when he saw it, but this was different. This was an adult man, wielding his power over a child who clearly had none. James felt something deep in his chest, a connection to his own memories of being powerless and hungry. of watching his mother count pennies and apologize for circumstances beyond her control. As Maya and her grandmother were ejected from the store, James made a decision that would change multiple lives forever. He gathered the papers from his passenger seat, straightened his tie, and stepped out of his car with the determined stride of someone who had spent decades solving problems and didn't intend to stop now. James had built his fortune not just through intelligence and hard work, but through his ability to read people and situations quickly. As he approached the store, he was already formulating a plan that went far beyond simply helping one family. His mind worked like a chess master, seeing moves and consequences several steps ahead. The bell above the door chimed as James entered the store. And Mr. Hale. Peterson looked up with the automatic smile he reserved for customers who looked like they had money to spend. James returned the smile, but his eyes were taking inventory of everything in the store with the precision of someone who understood business operations down to the smallest detail. James moved through the aisles slowly, observing the layout, the product selection, and the prices. He noted the security cameras, the cash register system, and the general organization of the business. To Mr. Peterson, he appeared to be a well-dressed customer taking his time with his shopping, but James was actually conducting a comprehensive business assessment. When he finally approached the counter with a few randomly selected items, James engaged Mr. Peterson in conversation with the easy charm that had helped him close million-dollar deals. He asked about the store's history, its customer base, and the challenges of running a small business in this neighborhood. Mr. Bryan? Peterson, flattered by the attention from such an obviously successful customer, opened up readily. During their conversation, James learned that Mr. Peterson owned the store outright but struggled with declining profit margins as larger chain stores moved into the area. He discovered that the store owner was genuinely worried about his future, about being able to maintain his livelihood in an increasingly competitive market. This information didn't excuse Mr. Blank Road, Peterson's behavior, but it helped James understand the fear and pressure that might have contributed to his harsh treatment of Maya. James also learned about the neighborhood itself, about the families who depended on this store because they didn't have transportation to reach the larger, cheaper grocery stores in more affluent areas. He heard about elderly customers on fixed incomes, single mothers working multiple jobs, and immigrant families trying to make ends meet in a country that often seemed designed to work against them. With each piece of information, James's plan became more refined. He wasn't just thinking about helping Maya and her grandmother anymore. He was seeing an opportunity to address a much larger problem, to use his resources in a way that would create lasting positive change for an entire community. As their conversation continued, James carefully steered the discussion toward the incident he had witnessed. He mentioned seeing a child and older woman leaving the store earlier, noting that they seemed upset. Mr. Peterson's expression immediately darkened, and he launched into a defensive explanation about maintaining store policies and preventing theft. James listened without interrupting, his expression neutral but his mind working furiously. He asked a few gentle questions about the store's policies, about how Mr. Peterson balanced customer service with business protection. The store owner, thinking he was speaking to a sympathetic fellow businessman, became increasingly frank about his methods and his attitudes towards his less affluent customers. With each word Mr. Peterson spoke, James felt more certain about his course of action. This wasn't just about one moment of cruelty, it was about a systematic lack of empathy, a business approach that saw poverty as suspicious rather than understanding it as circumstance. James had encountered this attitude before in various forms throughout his career, and he had developed very effective ways of addressing it. When Mr. Peterson finished his explanation, clearly expecting agreement and validation from his well-dressed customer, James simply nodded and asked to speak with the store's owner. Mr. Peterson proudly declared that he was indeed the owner, expecting congratulations on his entrepreneurial success. Instead, James asked for a few minutes of private conversation about a potential business proposition. Mr. Peterson's eyes lit up at the mention of business. In his experience, well-dressed customers didn't usually discuss propositions unless they involved significant money. He immediately locked the front door, turned the sign to closed, and invited James to sit down in his small office behind the counter. What happened in that office over the next 30 minutes would become the stuff of neighborhood legend. James began by presenting his business card. Watching as Mr. Colton, Peterson's eyes widened at the recognition of the company name and James's position within it. The store owner's demeanor immediately became more deferential, more eager to please. James started with compliments about the store's location and potential, discussing market opportunities and growth strategies with the expertise that had made him millions. He spoke about customer service excellence, about building loyalty through compassion and understanding. Mr. Peterson nodded eagerly, thinking he was receiving free consulting advice from a business genius. Then James shifted the conversation to discuss what he had witnessed earlier that morning. He described the scene in detail, noting the little girl's obvious hunger, the grandmother's dignity despite their poverty, and the harsh treatment they had received. He spoke about the impact such treatment could have on a business's reputation, especially in the age of social media and online reviews. Mr. Peterson began to realize that his morning encounter was going to have consequences he hadn't anticipated. James continued his explanation, detailing how businesses that gained reputations for lacking compassion often found themselves facing customer boycotts, negative publicity, and declining profits. He painted a picture of potential consequences that made Mr. Peterson's face grow pale. But James wasn't finished. He then presented an alternative scenario, one where the store could become known as a pillar of community support, a place where families knew they would be treated with dignity regardless of their economic status. He described the positive publicity, customer loyalty, and increased business that could result from such a reputation change. As James outlined his vision, Mr. Peterson began to understand that this conversation was not heading toward a traditional business partnership. This was something much more significant, something that would require him to fundamentally reconsider how he operated his business and treated his customers. The transformation in Mr. Peterson's attitude was subtle but noticeable. The defensive anger from earlier that morning had been replaced by a growing awareness of the consequences of his actions. James had presented the situation not as a moral lecture, but as a business reality that demanded attention and change. When James finally revealed the true purpose of his visit, when he explained exactly who Maya and Elena were and what he planned to do about their treatment, Mr. Peterson realized he was facing a moment that would define the rest of his business's future. The choice he made in the next few minutes would determine whether his store thrived or disappeared, whether his reputation in the community would be one of compassion or cruelty. Outside the store, Maya and Elena were making their way home slowly, unaware that their lives were about to change in ways they couldn't possibly imagine. They had no way of knowing that a stranger had witnessed their humiliation and was, at that very moment, working to ensure that they would never face such treatment again. The silence in Mr. Peterson's small office stretched for what felt like an eternity. James Morrison sat calmly across from the store owner, his fingers steepled as he waited for a response to the proposal he had just presented. The offer was simple in its structure, but revolutionary in its implications. James would purchase the store outright, paying significantly above market value, but only if certain conditions were met.
Mr. Grier had no partnership to discuss.
Peterson's mind raced as he tried to process what he had just heard. The amount James had mentioned was more than enough to pay off his business debts, secure his retirement, and leave him with substantial savings. It was the kind of offer that typically only existed in dreams, but it came with requirements that challenged everything he thought he knew about running a business. The first condition was that Mr. Peterson would remain as manager of the store for a minimum of 2 years, learning and implementing a completely new approach to customer service. He would receive training in community outreach, cultural sensitivity, and business practices that prioritized human dignity alongside profit. His salary during this transition period would be double what he was currently earning from the store's profits. The second condition involved establishing a community assistance program within the store. A portion of the inventory would be designated for families facing food insecurity, distributed with dignity and discretion. Customers would never be made to feel ashamed for needing help, and the program would be designed to support people through difficult times rather than creating dependence. James explained that he had researched the neighborhood extensively through previous charitable work and business investments. He knew that dozens of families in the area struggled with food insecurity, that children regularly went to school hungry, and that elderly residents often had to choose between medication and groceries. This store could become a lifeline for the community, but only if it operated with compassion and understanding. The third condition was perhaps the most personal. Mr. Peterson would personally apologize to Maya and her grandmother, not just for the morning's incident, but for any previous occasions when customers had been treated without proper respect. This apology would be followed by a standing invitation for them to shop at the store whenever needed, with a special account that would ensure they never left empty-handed. As James outlined each condition, he watched Mr. Peterson's face carefully. He had spent decades reading people's reactions, understanding what motivated them, and finding ways to align their interests with positive outcomes. He could see the internal struggle playing out across the store owner's features, pride warring with practicality, old habits fighting against new possibilities. Mr. Peterson finally spoke, his voice uncertain and questioning. He asked about the business model, how a store could remain profitable, while giving away inventory and prioritizing customer comfort over loss prevention. James smiled at the question, recognizing it as a sign that the store owner was beginning to seriously consider the proposal, rather than rejecting it outright. James explained his philosophy about sustainable business practices and community investment. He had learned through his own companies that businesses which genuinely cared for their communities often saw increased loyalty, positive word-of-mouth advertising, and long-term stability that more than compensated for short-term costs. He described other ventures he had funded, stores and services that had become integral parts of their neighborhoods while maintaining healthy profit margins. The conversation shifted as James shared his own background, talking about his childhood experiences with poverty and hunger. He described watching his mother work multiple jobs, the shame of using food stamps, and the kindness of strangers who had helped his family during their darkest moments. These experiences had shaped his understanding of business as a force that could either crush or uplift communities. Mr. Peterson listened with growing amazement as James revealed the personal motivations behind his offer. This wasn't just a wealthy man's attempt to feel good about himself. It was the result of deep understanding about how financial stress affected families and how businesses could either add to that stress or help alleviate it. The store owner began to see his morning encounter with Maya and Elena in a completely different light. James also addressed the practical concerns about managing such a program. He had already identified several non-profit organizations that specialized in food security and community outreach. These partners would provide training, ongoing support, and assistance with identifying families who could benefit from the assistance program. The store would not be operating in isolation, but as part of a larger network of community support. As the discussion continued, Mr. Peterson found himself thinking about his own grandchildren, imagining how he would feel if they were ever in Maya's situation. The thought of them facing the kind of treatment he had given Maya that morning made his stomach clench with shame and regret. For the first time since the morning's incident, he truly understood the impact of his actions, from the perspective of those who had suffered them. James sensed the shift in Mr. Peterson's attitude and pressed gently forward with additional details about his vision for the store. He described a place where children felt welcomed and safe, where elderly customers received patient assistance with their shopping, and where families from different cultural backgrounds found products that met their needs and preferences. The store could become a gathering place that strengthened community bonds rather than highlighting economic divisions. The transformation James envisioned went beyond simply providing food assistance. He wanted to create educational opportunities, perhaps offering basic financial literacy classes or English language conversation groups. The store could partner with local schools to provide after-school snacks for children, or collaborate with healthcare providers to offer nutrition education for families managing diabetes or other diet-related health conditions. Mr. Peterson realized that accepting James's offer would mean fundamentally changing not just his business practices, but his entire worldview. He would need to learn to see his customers as whole human beings rather than simply sources of revenue or potential threats to his inventory. This shift in perspective felt overwhelming, but also strangely exciting. As their conversation neared its conclusion, James presented the final element of his proposal. He wanted to establish a scholarship fund in Maya's name, providing educational support for children from low-income families in the neighborhood. The fund would help with school supplies, tutoring services, and eventually college preparation for students who demonstrated academic potential but lacked financial resources. The scholarship fund would be administered through the store, giving Mr. Farm Peterson direct involvement in supporting the educational dreams of local children. James explained that this responsibility would help the store owner understand the long-term impact of his daily decisions on the families he served. Each child who benefited from the scholarship would be a reminder that business success should be measured not just in profits, but in positive community impact. Mr. Howard. Peterson felt tears forming in his eyes as he fully grasped the magnitude of what James was offering. This wasn't just a business transaction. It was an opportunity for redemption, a chance to transform years of questionable business practices into a legacy of community support and genuine caring. The amount of money was significant, but the opportunity for personal growth and positive impact was invaluable. James could see that Mr. Peterson was ready to accept the offer, but he wanted to ensure that the store owner understood the commitment he was making. This wasn't a quick fix or a temporary arrangement. It was a fundamental change in how business would be conducted. Success would be measured not just in quarterly profits, but in the health and happiness of the community the store served. The two men shook hands across the small desk, sealing an agreement that would transform not just a business, but an entire neighborhood's relationship with dignity, respect, and mutual support. Mr. Peterson felt a weight lifting from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying, while James felt the satisfaction that came from using his resources to create meaningful, lasting change. As they finalized the details of their agreement, neither man could fully anticipate the ripple effects their handshake would create. Maya and Elena were still making their way home slowly, unaware that their morning of humiliation had set in motion a chain of events that would affect hundreds of families for years to come. The transformation of the corner store would become a model for other businesses in the area, proving that success and compassion were not mutually exclusive. But first, there was the immediate matter of finding Maya and Elena, offering them the apology and support they deserved, and beginning the process of healing the wounds that had been inflicted by ignorance and fear. James looked at his watch and realized that several hours had passed since he first witnessed the incident that had changed his day completely. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a little girl and her grandmother were probably wondering where they would find their next meal, and whether the world would ever treat them with the kindness they deserved. It was time to provide them with answers to both questions. Maya and Elena had walked nearly 2 miles from the corner store, their feet heavy with exhaustion, and their hearts even heavier with disappointment. They had stopped at 3 other stores along the way, but each experience had been a variation of the same theme. Suspicion, barely concealed hostility, or indifference that cut almost as deeply as outright cruelty. At the second store, the cashier had watched Elena count her coins with undisguised impatience, tapping her fingers on the counter and sighing loudly as if their poverty was a personal inconvenience. At the third store, Maya had been followed by a security guard who clearly believed that an 8-year-old girl posed some kind of threat to their inventory. The message was clear. People like them were not welcome, not trusted, and certainly not valued. Elena's arthritis was flaring up from the walking, but she pushed through the pain because she couldn't bear to see Maya's hunger continue. The little girl had stopped complaining about being hungry hours ago, which worried Elena even more than the earlier protests. Maya had learned too young that adults couldn't always fix problems, that sometimes you just had to endure discomfort and hope for better days. They finally found a small family-owned market where the elderly Korean couple who ran it treated them with basic human decency. The interaction was quiet and businesslike, but there was no hostility, no suspicion, no judgment. Elena was able to purchase a small container of milk and some bread, enough to get them through another day. As they sat on a bench outside the market, sharing small sips of milk and pieces of bread, Maya asked the question that had been haunting Elena all day. "Grandma, why don't people like us?" The innocence in her voice, the genuine confusion about why their economic situation seemed to make them targets for cruelty, broke Elena's heart all over again. Elena struggled to find an answer that an 8-year-old could understand without losing faith in humanity entirely. She talked about how some people forgot what it was like to struggle, how fear sometimes made people unkind, and how kindness was a choice that everyone had to make for themselves. She assured Maya that their worth as human beings had nothing to do with how much money they had or what other people thought about them. But even as Elena spoke these comforting words, she wondered if she truly believed them anymore. At 72, she had seen enough of the world to understand that kindness was often a luxury that many people felt they couldn't afford. She had watched her granddaughter learn lessons about inequality and injustice that no child should have to learn, and she felt powerless to protect Maya from a world that seemed designed to remind them constantly of their place at the bottom of the economic ladder. Meanwhile, across town, James Morrison had spent the afternoon making phone calls and arrangements that would change Maya and Elena's world forever. He had contacted private investigators to help locate the grandmother and granddaughter, providing them with the few details he had observed during the morning's incident. He had also reached out to social workers and community organizations to better understand the resources available for families in similar situations. James had learned that Maya and Elena were far from unique in their struggles. The neighborhood around the corner store was home to dozens of families facing food insecurity, inadequate housing, and the daily stress of making impossible choices between basic necessities. Children regularly attended school without breakfast, elderly residents skipped meals to afford medication, and working parents often went hungry to ensure their children had enough to eat. The more James learned about the community, the more determined he became to create lasting change, rather than simply helping one family. He had the resources to address these problems systematically, and he had the business experience to implement solutions that would be sustainable over time. Maya and Elena would be the beginning of his intervention, not the end of it. As evening approached, James's investigator called with the information he needed. Maya and Elena lived in a small apartment building about 3 miles from the corner store, in a neighborhood where Spanish was heard as often as English, and where the scent of cooking food from a dozen different cultures mixed together in the evening air. The investigator had confirmed their identities and provided their address, along with some additional background information that only deepened James's resolve to help. Elena was a widow who had been caring for Maya since her daughter died in a car accident 2 years earlier. She worked part-time cleaning offices, but her age and health problems limited her employment opportunities. Maya was a bright, curious child who excelled in school despite the challenges at home, but her teachers had noticed her difficulty concentrating and her frequent absences when Elena couldn't afford transportation, or when the little girl was too weak from hunger to attend classes. Armed with this information, James made his way to their neighborhood as the sun began to set. He had arranged for a local Hispanic social worker, Maria Santos, to accompany him, understanding that his sudden appearance might seem threatening or suspicious without proper introduction and cultural context. Maria had extensive experience working with immigrant families and elderly residents, and she knew how to approach delicate situations with the sensitivity they required. The apartment building where Maya and Elena lived was a 3-story structure that had seen better days, but was maintained with obvious care by residents who took pride in their homes despite limited resources. The small front yard featured a garden where various families grew vegetables and flowers, creating a splash of color and life against the urban landscape. James and Maria climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor, where they could hear the sounds of family life filtering through thin walls. Children laughing, television programs in multiple languages, and the clatter of dishes as families prepared dinner. The hallway smelled of cooking spices and cleaning products, evidence of residents who worked hard to create homes in less than ideal circumstances. When they knocked on Maya and Elena's door, the response was cautious and suspicious. Elena had learned to be wary of unexpected visitors, especially well-dressed strangers who might represent government agencies or landlords bearing bad news. She spoke to them through the closed door, asking them to identify themselves and state their business. Maria took the lead, introducing herself in fluent Spanish and explaining that they were there to discuss the incident at the corner store that morning. She assured Elena that they weren't from any government agency and that Maya wasn't in any trouble. Instead, they were there to offer help and support, if Elena was willing to listen to what they had to say. The door opened slowly, revealing Elena's weathered face marked by caution and fatigue. Behind her, Maya peered out with the wide eyes of a child who had learned that adult conversations often determined the course of her life in ways she couldn't control. Elena invited them in, apologizing for the modest surroundings as if their financial situation was somehow shameful. James was struck by the dignity with which Elena maintained their small home. Despite having very little, everything was clean and organized. Maya's school papers were displayed proudly on the refrigerator, and family photos showed happier times when Maya's mother was still alive. The apartment told the story of people who took care of what they had and found joy in small accomplishments and precious memories. As they sat in the tiny living room, James began to explain who he was and why he had come. He described witnessing the morning's incident at the corner store, and he could see the shame and embarrassment return to both Maya and Elena's faces as they relived that painful experience. But James quickly moved beyond the incident itself to focus on his response to what he had witnessed. Maria helped translate the more complex parts of James's explanation, ensuring that Elena understood not just the words, but the emotions and intentions behind them. James spoke about his own childhood experiences with poverty, about the importance of treating all people with dignity regardless of their economic circumstances, and about his desire to use his resources to create positive change in their community. When James revealed his agreement with Mr. Peterson and the transformation that would occur at the corner store, Elena's eyes filled with tears of disbelief and gratitude. The idea that a stranger would care enough about their treatment to take such dramatic action seemed almost impossible to comprehend. Maya listened with the intensity of a child trying to understand whether this meant their daily struggles with food and money might finally ease. But James wasn't finished with his revelations. He explained his broader plans for community support, including the scholarship fund that would bear Maya's name. He described the after-school programs, the family support services, and the network of businesses and organizations that would work together to ensure that families like theirs received the respect and assistance they deserved. As James outlined his vision, Maya began to understand that their morning of humiliation had somehow led to an opportunity for a completely different kind of life. She wouldn't have to worry about being hungry at school anymore, or watch her grandmother count pennies with arthritic fingers, or face the suspicious glares of store clerks who saw her poverty before they saw her humanity. Elena struggled to believe that such generosity was possible, without strings attached or hidden agendas. In her experience, help always came with conditions that made it almost as burdensome as the problems it was meant to solve. But James patiently answered every question, addressed every concern, and gradually convinced her that his offer was genuine and unconditional. As the evening progressed, the conversation expanded beyond immediate needs to include dreams and possibilities that had seemed impossibly distant just hours before. Maya talked about wanting to become a teacher so she could help other children learn and grow. Elena spoke about her desire to see Maya graduate from high school and attend college, goals that had seemed unrealistic given their financial constraints. James listened to their dreams with the understanding that his resources could transform aspirations into achievable plans. Maya's education would be fully supported, from elementary school through college. Elena's health issues would be addressed through connections with quality healthcare providers. Their housing situation would be improved through partnerships with organizations that specialized in affordable, dignified living arrangements for seniors and families. The transformation that began with a spoonful of milk had expanded into something neither Maya nor Elena could have imagined. Their encounter with cruelty had led to an introduction to compassion on a scale that would change not just their lives, but the lives of countless other families in their community. As James and Maria prepared to leave, promising to return the next day to begin implementing the support services they had discussed, Maya asked a question that would stay with James forever. Will other kids get to have enough milk now too? Her concern for others, even after her own painful experience, confirmed James's belief that kindness and empathy were not privileges of wealth, but qualities that could flourish anywhere when given the chance. 3 months after the morning that changed everything, the corner store had become unrecognizable from its former self. The physical changes were immediately apparent to anyone who had shopped there before. Fresh paint in warm, welcoming colors, improved lighting that made the space feel larger and more inviting, and clear, multilingual signs that helped customers from different cultural backgrounds navigate the store with ease. But the real transformation went far beyond cosmetic improvements. The atmosphere inside the store had shifted completely, from suspicious and unwelcoming to warm and inclusive. Mr. Peterson, now working under James's guidance and with extensive training from community organizations, greeted customers by name when possible and always with genuine warmth. Children who had once been followed and watched were now offered small cups of fresh fruit juice and encouraged to help their parents shop. Maya had become something of a celebrity in the neighborhood, though she remained blissfully unaware of her fame. Other families had heard the story of her encounter with Mr. Peterson and James's subsequent intervention, and many parents used her experience as a teaching moment about standing up for what's right and believing that positive change is possible, even in the darkest moments. The little girl herself had flourished under the new circumstances. Her grades had improved dramatically now that she wasn't distracted by constant hunger, and her teacher reported that Maya was participating more actively in class discussions and showing increased confidence in social situations. She had grown 2 inches in 3 months, finally receiving the proper nutrition her developing body needed. Elena's transformation was equally remarkable. Access to quality healthcare through James's network of medical providers had helped manage her arthritis pain and address several other health issues she had been ignoring due to cost concerns. With reliable food assistance and reduced financial stress, she had been able to focus on her relationship with Maya and return to some of the activities she had enjoyed before poverty consumed all her energy and attention. The community assistance program at the corner store had quietly helped over 60 families in its first 3 months of operation. The program operated with such discretion that customers could receive support without anyone else in the store knowing about their circumstances. Families would simply receive additional items with their purchases, presented as promotional offers or customer appreciation gifts that preserved their dignity while meeting their needs. James had been careful to ensure that the assistance program was sustainable and well managed. He had partnered with local food banks and government assistance programs to avoid duplication of services and maximize the impact of available resources. Social workers helped identify families who would benefit from support, and the program included counseling and job placement services for parents who wanted to improve their economic situations. The ripple effects of the store's transformation had spread throughout the neighborhood in ways that surprised even James. Other businesses had begun to examine their own customer service practices, and several had implemented training programs focused on treating all customers with equal respect and dignity. A small restaurant 2 blocks away had started offering free meals to elderly customers on fixed incomes, inspired by the corner store's example. Local schools had noticed the positive changes in students whose families were receiving support through the assistance program. Teachers reported that children were more focused in class, more likely to participate in extracurricular activities, and showed improved social skills. The scholarship fund in Maya's name had already provided support to 12 elementary school students, covering school supplies, field trip fees, and after-school program costs that their families couldn't afford. Maya's own awareness of her role in these changes had grown gradually, and James had been careful to help her understand the importance of using positive experiences to help others, rather than simply feeling grateful for her own good fortune. The 8-year-old had begun volunteering at the store's weekend children's reading program, helping younger children with their homework and sharing books that the scholarship fund had provided. Elena had become an informal mentor to other elderly residents in their building, sharing information about healthcare resources and assistance programs that she had learned about through her connection with James's network of service providers. Her own experience of moving from desperation to stability had given her unique insight into the challenges faced by other seniors struggling with fixed incomes and limited support systems. The changes extended beyond individual families to affect the entire community's sense of possibility and hope. Residents who had previously felt invisible and powerless began to organize around other issues affecting their neighborhood. A community garden project had started in an empty lot, bringing together families from different cultural backgrounds to grow food and build relationships. Mr. Peterson's personal transformation had been as dramatic as his stores. The training he had received about cultural sensitivity and poverty awareness had opened his eyes to perspectives he had never considered before. He had begun attending community meetings and volunteering with local organizations, using his business experience to help other small entrepreneurs understand how to serve diverse customer bases effectively. The former store owner often spoke about the morning when Maya had reached for that spoonful of milk, describing it as the moment when he realized how far he had drifted from his own values. He credited James's intervention not just with saving his business, but with saving his relationship with his own grandchildren, who had been ashamed of stories they heard about his treatment of customers. James had established a foundation to replicate the corner store model in other underserved communities, but he had learned that successful intervention required understanding the unique characteristics of each neighborhood. What worked in Maya and Elena's community might need significant modification to be effective elsewhere, but the core principles of dignity, respect, and sustainable support could be adapted to different cultural and economic contexts. The foundation had attracted attention from other wealthy individuals who were interested in using their resources for community development rather than traditional charity models. James found himself speaking at conferences about sustainable business practices and community investment, sharing the lessons he had learned from his intervention in Maya's neighborhood. Maya herself had become more outspoken about issues affecting children and poverty, though her advocacy remained age-appropriate and focused on concrete actions rather than abstract policy discussions. She had spoken at a school district meeting about the importance of free breakfast programs, and her simple, honest description of what it felt like to be hungry in class had moved several board members to tears and led to expanded nutrition programs. The scholarship fund had grown beyond James's initial contribution as other community members and local businesses began making donations. Maya's story had inspired a level of local philanthropy that surprised everyone involved, proving that people were willing to support positive change when they could see tangible results and knew their contributions would be used effectively. Elena had begun sharing her story with social work students at the local university, helping future professionals understand the importance of treating clients with dignity and respect regardless of their circumstances. Her presentations always included Maya's perspective, emphasizing how children are affected by the way adults respond to their families' economic challenges. The evening news had featured the store's transformation as part of a series on innovative approaches to community development, and the story had inspired similar initiatives in other cities. James had been careful to ensure that media coverage focused on the community's efforts and resilience, rather than positioning him as a savior figure, understanding that sustainable change required local ownership and pride. As Maya's 9th birthday approached, her wish list reflected both typical childhood desires and a mature understanding of her role in the community changes that had occurred. She wanted books for the store's reading program, art supplies for the community center, and a celebration that would include all the families who had been helped by the assistance program. James had realized that his intervention in Maya's life had changed him as much as it had changed her family and community. His business decisions were now guided by different priorities, and his personal relationships had deepened as he learned to value connection and impact over accumulation and achievement. He had discovered that using wealth to address inequality was far more satisfying than simply accumulating more wealth. The corner store had become a symbol of what was possible when resources, compassion, and community commitment worked together. Visitors from other neighborhoods came to see how the assistance program operated, and several universities sent students to study the model as part of coursework on social entrepreneurship and community development. Looking back on that morning 9 months earlier, Maya sometimes wondered if things would have turned out differently if she had never reached for that spoonful of milk. But Elena always reminded her that kindness and cruelty were choices that adults made every day, and that Maya's simple desire for nutrition had revealed the character of everyone involved, in ways that created opportunities for positive change. The story of an 8-year-old girl ejected from a store for wanting milk had become the story of a community transformed by one person's decision to turn witnessed injustice into lasting change. Maya's name would eventually be on a scholarship fund that supported hundreds of children through their education. But more importantly, her experience had proven that individual acts of compassion could create ripple effects that changed entire neighborhoods for the better. James often reflected that Maya had taught him more about business and life than any of his corporate mentors. Her resilience, her concern for others despite her own struggles, and her ability to maintain hope in difficult circumstances had shown him what real strength looked like. The millionaire had appeared in Maya's life at exactly the right moment, but she had appeared in his life at exactly the moment he needed to remember what wealth was truly for.